The state of the economy is so bad right now that neither Trump nor Biden directly addressed it during their debate, and the things they did say will ultimately leave less space in your budget. Let's talk about this. Welcome to the AlterNate Vantage. My name is Nate, and this is where I provide a different perspective on financial literacy, news, and generational wealth. If you like that kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's go. Leaving aside incoherent statements, golfing statistics, and who of them was the worst president, let's talk about something that impacts all of us, which is the economy. Now, despite this debate going on for about an hour and a half, there was actually very little said regarding the economy and what they plan to do, but they did leave us with a few hints here and there about what some of their plans include. Let's talk about a few of those things, and we're going to start with Biden first.
We're going to make sure that we reduce the price of housing. We're going to make sure we build 2 million new units. We're going to make sure we cap rents so corporate greed can't take over.
Now, reducing the price of housing is arguably a good thing, right? Because many of the homes across America are currently inflated. Now, with that good thing can also come some bad things, and it's called the Pareto principle, which essentially means that 20% of the overall stock will impact the price of the remaining 80%. So if we have a large 20% move in the overall housing market, then it's going to impact the prices of the other 80% of houses that remain on the market. And right now, there's an estimated close to about 1.8 million homes of all types that are available for sale in America. Now, if we're going to talk about introducing an additional 2 million units to the already provided 1.8 million, then we are essentially more than doubling the amount of units that are for sale. Obviously, these things don't necessarily work out in that exact fashion. We wouldn't see the 2 million become available all at one time. It's going to trickle into the market. But either way, even if there was a shock of 5% or 10%, 15%, 20%, and it really doesn't matter, the result of it is going to be the same. We are going to see a reduction in the price for housing, which of course is accomplishing the goal that he's stating. Now, once again, I said this is arguably a good thing. Housing becomes more affordable. But what about the people who are already in homes that are at the peak of their value, and they just got into those homes at the marvelous 6 to 7 to 8% interest rates, depending on when and how they came into the market. And now, like most homeowners, they're probably planning on moving in 3 to 5 years, because 99% of homeowners do move in the first 3 to 5 years. So if that's the case, they found themselves in a home that's now decreasing in value. They still hold on to the mortgage, and if they try and go and sell that house, then they're going to be underwater in that mortgage, meaning they're not going to make money in that sale. They're going to have to come to the table with money in order to walk away from that home. And to make matters worse, if, for example, full-time jobs keep on declining at the rates that they are, then we could see more layoffs taking place. And if we have more layoffs taking place, then now we have more people who are underwater in a mortgage with no job, no way to pay for it, no way to get into a new home. And if these rent caps don't come in time, they might not be able to rent a place either. And that means we're going to have more properties that are foreclosing. And if you have more properties that are foreclosing, it goes back to the Pareto principle of 20% impacting the remaining 80%. And obviously, foreclosing homes, for the most part, are going to sell way under their value, which is going to affect the remaining of the comparables in that neighborhood for any other home that's foreclosing. Oh my goodness, you can see this huge downward spiral here, and it kind of moves us into another housing crash, kind of what we witnessed back in 2008, 2009, 2010, except some may argue this bubble is way bigger than what it was back then. So, yes, the introduction of more units is going to be a good thing. Home prices will come down, but that's not a good thing for everybody. And then if you want to talk about instituting a rent cap, well, that's not good for the commercial real estate investors either, because oftentimes they're having to increase rent because, just as an example, insurance has increased as much as 40% in some areas, which by nature is going to force any of these landowners to increase the rent so they can afford the insurance. And if you institute a rent cap, then really some of these insurance companies, real estate investment trusts, for example, that were previously already had some pretty thin margins because of where we are right now in the housing market, well, they probably just witnessed all of those margins get thrown away completely. Now they're operating in the red, and you can only do that for a certain amount of time before you have to sell the building and make out with the equity and try and recuperate some form of your losses that you had up until that point. So his plan here to reduce the housing price probably going to be accomplished, especially through the introduction of those 2 million units on top of the foreclosures and on top of the rent caps. But is that good for everybody? Not necessarily. Moving on to the second statement that Biden made concerning the economy.
What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24% 25%, either one of those numbers. They'd raise $500 million, billion dollars, I should say, in a 10-year period.
He wants to institute a tax on the uber wealthy so that they'd pay 24% instead of paying an average of 8% in taxes right now. Now, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what kind of effect this would have on the economy. Sure, it might generate more tax revenue for the government, but of course, there's always trickle-down effects for these things that we like to do. And so it's kind of hard to determine exactly what would take place here because we don't necessarily know where these uber wealthy individuals are getting their money from, but if they are uber wealthy, then I can go ahead and make a few assumptions. Number one, they're probably business owners. Number two, they're probably boards of directors for a lot of these large companies, or they're just top producers in some form or fashion of another industry. Now, regardless, when we describe the uber wealthy, a lot of times these individuals do not have a traditional income. As a matter of fact, there was someone in my comments recently who was saying that they pay more taxes than the uber wealthy do. For example, he's estimating, I think he paid like anywhere from 20 to 30% in taxes, but the uber wealthy are paying less than 10%. And he was saying they need to pay their fair share, which I said, I don't disagree with you. Everyone should pay their fair share according to the tax laws. And the fact of the matter is this, the uber wealthy, most times, like I said, they don't have a stereotypical income. Oftentimes, they try not to have an income at all, because if you have an income, you have to pay income taxes. So if all of your money is coming to you into your bank account in the form of personal income, then yeah, there's no getting away from, I should say, those personal income taxes. You're going to have to pay them. But if you're not receiving your money in the form of income, if instead it's going through, for example, a specially structured, like special purpose vehicle through a multitude of companies and businesses and foundations and trusts and so forth, then you can mitigate a very large portion of those taxes you previously would have had if you decided to take that as personal income. Now, for a regular employee, 1099 contractor, this is simply not an option. Every single form of money you receive from your job is classified as income. You can't get around those personal income taxes. But if you're doing business as a business, then you have the entire tax code at your disposal. And the whole point of taxes is that you don't pay any more than you are required to according to the tax code. And so if these companies are getting away with paying, or I should say uber wealthy, are getting away with paying 8% in taxes, then they're only able to do that because the tax code allows them to. So there's no cheating the system. There's no circumventing the system. They're simply leveraging the system to the best of their abilities. But like I said before, if these are the uber wealthy, we can assume they're business owners, they're boards of directors, they're people who are top producers. If we start nickel and diming away at their profits, whatever they are, even if they're immense, if we start taking away from that, their first motivation is to reclaim what they lost. And if they want to reclaim it, then an easy way of doing that is whatever product, whatever service they sell, they're simply going to increase the prices. If you don't believe me and understand how that works, then go watch my previous video about how I literally talk about every single company in the history of the United States pays $0 in taxes. I prove it mathematically. You can see for yourself, and I show you exactly how this works. So go check it out if you haven't had a chance to see it yet. Now, the other statement that Biden said, which was kind of offhanded but directly impacts the economy, is that he says he's going to, or I should say, he has already done the most concerning climate change.
I've passed the most extensive climate change legislation in history.
Now, climate change is a very interesting topic when it comes to the economy. A lot of people don't see those things as related, but they are directly related, and they impact you every single day. Now, most people concerning climate change, they're going to try and keep it to, preservation of the world, preservation of our water supplies, preservation of our air quality. We have to preserve these things for the future, so we need to do things today. That's where most people try and keep the climate change conversation. Now, to keep this from being too polarizing, because I don't want to, have quabbles about the data concerning climate change, whether it exists, whether it does not exist, I don't really care. I want to talk about the realities that are facing and impacting us every single day right now, and that is when it comes to our budgets, our wallets, my savings account, my checking account. It's impacting all of these things. So Biden's statement was this: he's going to do the most concerning climate change, which sounds great. However, he doesn't go into detail as far as what that means. I'm only going to make some assumptions here. Feel free to agree with me or not. It's your choice. So when he says he's going to do the most, I can only assume that means he's going to institute more climate change policies. Maybe more controls on carbon emissions, maybe more controls on other polluting factors, whatever they define that to be. That's my assumption. The first and most important thing to realize is that for the most part, the pollution that's being generated right now from our ecosystem, if you want to call it that, most of it is not being created firsthand by the consumer. It's actually being created by the commercial complex. It is in large part a byproduct of the manufacturing process for everything that we do eventually consume. And because of that, when we're talking about climate change policies, the first entity that it usually impacts the most are businesses. They're being hamstringed in a lot of ways about how they can go about doing things. And if they don't do things within those new policies and processes, then a lot of times they face penalties, which is usually coughing up some dough. So if you want to look at it from that perspective, really, all that climate change policies do is create a new expense, a new cost to businesses. Because here's what happens. They have to hire more people to do their climate change analysis. They have to get more legal counsel. They might have to change their formulas, change their manufacturing process. They might have to change their demographics altogether. There's so many things that they have to shift and turn, which requires manpower. It requires research. It requires going into different aspects of the market, which they never had to touch before, and therefore is a whole new environment. It might not even be proven for their product at all. They're having to make all of these shifts. And all of that are just stacking expenses to the business. Now, businesses are designed to do one thing and one thing only: make money. That's a profit. So if we have all these expenses stacking up, that means their profit is slowly going down from all of the climate change policies. And once again, in my previous video, I talk about anything that creates an expense for a company and eats away at their profit margins is ultimately going to get passed on to the consumer so they can bump these profit margins back up. But right alongside that, the price also gets bumped up. So if Biden, in his own statements, is going to do the most and has done the most for climate change, then my only assumption is that these policies are going to increase, not decrease. And if they increase, that means more expenses for companies. And if it means more expenses for companies, it means higher prices for consumers. That's the big cause and effect here when we're talking about climate change policies and what the politicians are wanting to do to maybe potentially, because we're thinking about it, hopeful that we'll save the climate in the future, even though the data is largely inconclusive. All right, I don't want to get too far down that topic. I'm actually going to make a whole separate video on ESG and how that impacts the economy. So if you want to see that in the future, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell notification so you can stay up to date. Last but not least, for Biden's statements, he talked about the Social Security Administration.
Make the very wealthy begin to pay their fair share. Right now, everybody making under $170,000 pays 6% of their income, of their paycheck, every single time they get a paycheck from the time the first one they get when they're 18 years old. The idea that they're going to, I'm proposing that everybody, the millionaires pay 1%. 1%.
He essentially said that the average income worker, I think he quoted $170,000 per year, is paying 6% in Social Security taxes, which makes sense. And then he was saying the average wealthy person is only paying about 1%. And he was very confident that by doing that alone, the Social Security Administration will be able to carry itself in the future. I would be very hard pressed to believe that. But just like any other situation, if you're trying to increase taxes on the uber wealthy businesses and anything else, then that's ultimately just going to get passed on to the consumers to begin with. So yes, we might see the extension of Social Security. It might last a few more years, but either way, it's something that we are all going to have to pay for today. Okay, that's Biden. And this is a neutral conversation here. Trust me, I'm about to get into Trump and a couple of things that he said and what it means for you. And I just got to be honest, it was actually very difficult to come to the table with some things Trump has said, because most of his retorts, comments, answers, and so forth were exclamations about how terrible of a job Biden did and how great of a job he did. He really didn't provide many data points that I could go off of at all when it came to his plan for the economy. And that's not to say that he doesn't have a plan. I'm just trying to say that I couldn't provide a lot of analysis on his plan that he stated inside the debate specifically as it pertains to us. But he did make a few comments, and I'll go over those right now. First, he did notion that he was going to keep, or I should say, extend the Tax Cuts and Job Act that he instituted in 2017.
All my life, I'd grow up and I'd see politicians talking about cutting taxes. When we cut taxes, as I said, we did more business. Apple and all these companies, they were bringing money back into our country.
And what that essentially did is that previously companies were taxed upwards of 39% based on their revenues for that year, but he reduced it to an overall flat tax of 21% regardless of revenue. So the premise of this program was simple. They wanted to reduce expenses, aka taxes, so that way companies could save that money and use it towards hiring more people. Because for the large companies that were getting eaten alive in these taxes, they could find it kind of difficult to expand into different areas, hire more people, because they didn't have enough money left over at the end of the year to justify that kind of spend. But after reducing taxes, aka reducing expenses, the companies now had more liquidity to use to go and hire more people. And if you want to think of it this way, employment is nothing more than a cost phenomenon. Simply stated, if it makes the company money to hire someone, they're going to hire someone. If it doesn't make the company money to hire someone, then they're not going to hire someone. So if you make an environment where it makes sense for the company to hire more people because they get more profits, then they're going to do that all day, every day. Hence, you're going to have way better employment. But if you make an environment where things are very expensive, it's hard for a company to generate a profit, then they're going to hire less and less people, and then unemployment starts to go up. So by decreasing the taxes like it did in 2017, he created an opportunity where companies now had the chance to go about and hiring more people because they had more money to work with. Whether or not they took that opportunity is entirely up to them. And this also could create environments where prices decrease as well, because once again, they're not paying as much in taxes. His second point, he talked about tariffs, which is currently set at like a flat 10%, if I'm not mistaken.
Do you notice he never took out my tariffs because we bring in so much money with the tariffs that I imposed on China? He never took them away. He can't because it's too much money. It's tremendous. And we saved our steel industries, and there was more to come, but he hasn't done that.
And he gestured at the fact that he would continue that in the future, if not increase it himself. But here's the thing that most people don't realize when it comes to tariffs. The largest beneficiary, in most cases, is not the company, it's not the consumer, it's the government when it comes to tariffs. Hence why he mentioned that is a great revenue-generating vehicle for the government when you institute a tariff. And here's how that breaks down. I'll show you exactly what happens. Just as a quick example, let's just say I run an e-commerce store and I buy my products from China, and those products cost me $100. I can then turn around and sell that product in America for $120. So that's a profit of $20 back to me. Pretty great. But if tariffs go up by 10%, that product from China is no longer $100, it's now $110. If I try and go and sell that product for the same $120, my profit on that is now only $10. That's a 50% decrease. Absolutely unacceptable. I want my full $20. So what am I going to do? Instead of selling it for $120, I'm going to sell it for $130. Now I still get the same $20 profit margin as I had before, and everybody's happy, right? Well, wrong, because you have to think about it. Who paid for that tariff? Was it China that exported the product into the US? No. Was it me, the business owner, who imported the product, who bought it originally at 100 and then 110 once tariffs went up? No, not me. Was it the consumer that actually, paid for all of this? Because instead of buying a product for 120, they now have to buy it for 130? Well, yeah, it's the consumer who actually paid for the tariff, that $10 change. Not me, the business, not China, the country. It was the consumer. That's assuming demand remains flat, the exact same. And then you have to think about this as well. Did I get that extra $10 from the tariff? No. Did China get that extra $10 from the tariff? No. Did the consumer get an extra $10 in value from the product? No. Then where did that money go to? Oh, it went to the government, of course, because they're the largest beneficiary of tariffs. And who paid for it? The consumer. So tariffs in themselves, they sound great, but really it's just another form of taxation on the consumer of that country where tariffs are used. And yes, of course, it can actually generate situations where companies can hire more people. It does encourage more domestic production. It does encourage more domestic purchasing. But at the end of the day, who's paying for those price changes? It's the consumer. And then finally, the only other statement that I could really get a lot of, emphasis or data behind is that Trump would encourage all forms of energy types.
We had the best numbers ever, and we were using all forms of energy, all forms, everything. And yet, during my 4 years, I had the best environmental numbers ever.
My only assumption here is that he would make it more cost beneficial for both upstream and downstream investments into oil, which right now, the upstream, just as an example, is getting way, way, way more expensive because of the permitting process that Biden has instituted from the climate change policies. So it's becoming more difficult for American oil companies to do research and development for other places they want to drill and, of course, extract those oil products from. But, of course, if Trump is encouraging the full use, or I should say full development of energy, then we might see those energy costs come down because he's making it making it more cost beneficial, which means you could save money if energy costs overall go down. So this is just a quick summary of some of the comments that the candidates made concerning the economy, how it's going to directly impact you. There's a couple of the nuggets in there, but I didn't feel like they were worth exploring because they're just kind of obscured, off the wall, and very inconclusive based on the things that they said. But either way, if you like this kind of content and you found it helpful and educational, don't forget to both like and subscribe. And if you think someone else needs to see this, then share it as well, or maybe even leave a comment about what was your favorite part of the debate. That'd be great. With that, I will catch you in the next one.